Ever wanted to play your 3DS games on something other than a 3DS? If so, may I offer you a Citra in these trying times? Citra is the 3DS emulator available right now, and it packs a ton of performance that offers quite a few benefits over your basic modded 3DS, like playing on that 3D phone you bought a while back, or multiplying a game's resolution several times over because you can. Like other emulators, I can also imagine it being fairly intimidating to get started as a newcomer. As such, I'm going to take a moment to go over actual setup steps before we jump into juicy emulation recommendations. If you already have Citra set up and ready to go, feel free to use the chapters to jump ahead a little bit. Okay, before anything else, let's answer the big question. Where can you get 3DS ROMs to even use Citra? For that, the only real answer is to buy a 3DS, buy a game, mod the 3DS, potentially using one of our previous videos as a guide, and dump the game to an SD card. If you look at subreddits like r/ROMs, you're bound to find folks recommending various locations on the internet to download various files and whatnot. But honestly, the only foolproof way to get the best quality ROMs and the lowest chance of issues is to dump the games yourself. For the purpose of this video, I'm only using ROMs I've backed up from my personal collection. With that out of the way, setting up Citra is actually incredibly easy. If you're using Windows or Linux, go to citraemu.org, click the download here button, and open the download. From there, you should be guided through an installation wizard detailing what will be downloaded and where it's being downloaded. Typically, the experience should be as smooth as clicking OK a few times. If you want to live on the bleeding edge, you can also try out the nightly or canary builds, available through the same website or even the installation wizard. Those builds could have additional features and better performance, but could also have bugs that haven't been squashed yet. Use at your own discretion. If you're using Android, you technically have the option of either going through the website or through the Play Store. To be honest, I often default to the Play Store on a new device out of sheer convenience, but that version also happens to be 2 years out of date. If you want the best experience, go with the website. For this video, any gameplay footage you see will be using either website downloads or direct downloads from Citra's GitHub page, all of which are linked in the description. Unfortunately, if you're using a non-Android ARM-based system, you're pretty much out of luck as of this video. There's no iOS support currently, and Windows on ARM doesn't have support for the graphics APIs used by Citra. ARM-based macOS systems are a bit more finicky. The installer downloaded via the website is unable to install anything. However, if you don't mind tinkering a bit, you can manually rebuild Citra yourself and use it that way. Personally, unless you're just doing it for a project, I'd recommend shelling out the cash for a cheap flagship Android phone from a year or two ago. Anyway, once Citra is installed, you'll want to direct it to your games folder containing the .3ds and .cxi files created when you backed up your games. Afterward, your homepage will be populated by a list of all of your games ready to be played. Although, of note, I've had some issues getting .cxi files to work properly on Android. The games I've tried work fine on Windows, but fail when I try to open them on Android. It's still worthwhile to give a shot yourself, but know that it's at least happened to me if you experience any issues. Now, if you have any update files for any of your games, your first step should be to install those update files. To do that, you'll want to select File, Install CIA, navigate to the folder with your .cia files, select each of the files, and hit OK. Citra will apply the updates from those files to the current games you have available to play. If you have saved data you backed up from your 3DS using Checkpoint, you can use that with Citra as well. For those on Windows or Linux, open Citra, right-click on the game with the saved data you want to swap in, and choose Open Save Data Location. A file explorer should pop up with the location Citra looks at to determine save data. Simply delete anything that's in there already and then paste your checkpoint save data into that location. Usually it'll be a main file. On Android, it's a similar process, except you'll need to navigate to that folder manually. To do so, open up your file browser, select Citra Emu, SDMC, Nintendo 3DS, long folder name, title, 00040,000, and then inside that, each of the folders are named according to the associated game's title ID. If you're not sure which one's the game you're after, check out 3dsdb.com for an easy reference. After selecting the right folder, select Data, and then go one folder deeper until you see a main file. As on Windows, just delete that file and replace it with your checkpoint save. Next, let's set up your controller. If you're on Android, you can use touch controls by launching the game, accessing the Citra menu, selecting Configure Controls, Edit Layout, and then just arranging your on-screen buttons however you wish. You can even use the same menu to toggle controls altogether to selectively disable buttons you don't need at the moment, like the right stick or ZR and ZL. As a rule of thumb, touch controls are fine for slower games, like mainline Pokemon games, but tend to be really unsatisfying for anything faster paced where you need any degree of precision. For that, you'll want to set up a physical controller. Connect the controller to your device, then you'll go to Emulation, Configure, and select the Controls menu. From here, you can set up a new controller profile and manually map your buttons by left-clicking on one of the buttons and pressing the corresponding button on your controller. On Android, it's the same deal. Just go to Settings, Gamepad, and tap any buttons you want to map. If you're using something with an integrated controller like a Steam Deck, I'd still recommend manually mapping your controls, even if another software, like Steam, is already remapping them for your games. Your mileage may vary, but I've personally found Citra to be a little awkward interpreting controller inputs if I don't set them up first. Once your controller's set up, you can also poke around the other options in the Configure menu for some additional fine-tuning of your gameplay experience. For most people, I'd say the renderer options in the graphics menu is probably going to be the most important. If able, make sure you're running using Vulkan instead of OpenGL. Usually, that'll lead to better performance overall. Next, setting the internal resolution correctly is key to getting the best performance out of your device. Setting it to 2x or 3x to start might be a good strategy. If, when actually playing a game, you find that gameplay is a bit sluggish, you can lower the resolution further. Alternatively, if everything's running smoothly, you can increase the resolution until something breaks. With my Fold 4, up to 4x resolution is actually playable, while 1x or 2x is often a bit smoother. My desktop with an RTX 3060 and 11th gen i7 processor can push higher than 4x, but again, it ends up being a balancing act between frame rates and image quality. After you've confirmed your changes, consider adjusting your screen layout to whatever seems natural. You'll do this by launching the game and then selecting the screen layout menu. On all systems, you'll have the option of either a default setting, portrait, single screen, or side by side. On Windows and Linux, you'll also have the option to separate the 3DS displays into separate windows, which I highly recommend trying out for yourself. Even if playing only on a single screen, it's a bit more flexible to find adjustments of display size when you separate them out into different windows. Unfortunately, Citra on Android doesn't currently have any additional options available for layout sizes. If you wanted to alter your layout beyond the default options, you'd need to update the underlying config.ini file. Alternatively, you could also download a fork of Citra where someone's added those features themselves. Citra MMJ in particular has support for manually rearranging screens and adding custom backgrounds, which allow for some fun customization on devices with non-standard aspect ratios. Okay, games are populated, controllers set up, screen layout is determined. Let's actually play a game. In general, playing 3DS games through Citra is pretty good. Most of the most popular 3DS games work decently well, and very few games don't play at all. If you're curious about the general emulation status of a particular game, you can always check out Citra's compatibility guide, linked in the description. Through testing most of my library, I've found it to be fairly accurate to predicting how well a game will actually run. Most issues I've seen with Citra boil down to graphical glitches or textures looking a bit funky. For example, in any section of Pokemon Y with 3D effects built in, some textures appear to go missing or seem kinda garbled. This is actually improved dramatically from even a year ago when the textures were too distracting for me to actually want to play for long play sessions. Now it's really no issue, as long as I don't mind the occasional annoyance. I could totally play through the full game this way. It's also worth noting, through testing various devices, I've run Citra on much older phones than my Fold 4 without it being a total mess. My favorite of which actually has to be the Red Hydrogen 1. Its 3D display, while impossible to film correctly, is perfect for checking out 3D effects on any game where using only the top screen isn't too terrible, like Super Mario 3D Land. Support for its display does require an older fork of Citra though, so emulation isn't quite perfect. In general, not perfect will be the mantra of anyone trying to play games via Citra on older handheld devices, where playable really comes down to a mixture of expectations and patience. Older tech might also mean testing out older builds of Citra, since newer builds may have features targeting newer devices. The same goes for laptops and desktops, by the way. Although in that tech space, performance creep tends to be a little slower due to hardware typically being viable for a bit longer than on phones, especially when coupled with dedicated graphics. As a more extreme example, here's a ThinkPad X240 rocking a dual-core 4th gen Intel i5 processor playing through the first level of Super Mario 3D Land. Resolutions at 1x, and there are a few dips to performance every once in a while, but the frame rate and game speed tend to be fairly consistent. If you have a computer newer than this 10-year-old relic, there's a pretty good sign you'll be able to use Citra, maybe not at the highest quality, but still without it being completely terrible. Although anyone really dedicated to making 3DS emulation work well should be looking toward newer hardware, of course. Mid-range laptops and desktops, as well as flagship phones from the past couple of years, are going to be more than enough to get great performance. To get the most out of your setup though, I'd recommend using 2 screens whenever you can, since you're emulating a dual screen console, and going handheld whenever you can. Doing both will get you as close as possible to the feel of something like a 2DS XL, while still benefiting from more powerful hardware. On the fully featured OS side of things, the Steam Deck tends to be my go-to recommendation. It has more than enough horsepower to use Citra to its fullest while having a moderately portable form factor with integrated controls. You can also slap a second screen on it to turn it into a multi-display system fairly easily. Doing so works extremely well for transforming this large pad into an oversized 2DS with much more comfortable controls. We've done a couple videos on this setup so far. Go and watch those if you haven't already and want additional info. I've also just launched a new 3D printable adapter for deckmate grips to more easily attach a phone as a second screen with less jank. A link to that will be in the description if you'd like to check any of it out. But alternatively, if you're looking for something more pocketable, the Surface Duo line is the best option around, hands down. These dual screen smartphones have the same size as a 3DS XL with much larger, much better looking displays. Without caveat, they're better than any DS for DS emulation, and the only thing holding them back from taking the throne from a 3DS is the progress of Citra. The screens have more than enough room to maintain a proper aspect ratio for 3DS games while including on-screen touch controls for slower games. Both the Duo 2 and Duo 1 also slot perfectly into clip-on controllers like the Bluetooth GameSir X2 for faster games. The catch? Well, the Duo 2 is expensive and currently unavailable through many of the main electronics retailers, including Microsoft. The Duo 1 is cheaper and more readily available, but also has an older chipset which performs slightly worse for 3DS emulation. For other options, there are foldable phones like the Samsung Fold line, and phones with second screen attachments like LG's V60. But those do come at a bit of a cost to form factor and performance. The Fold 4 can mimic a 2DS quite well, but you'll have large black bars when using an external controller. Likewise, while LG's phones have two separate displays, their aspect ratios don't jive well with the 3DS's screen size, which might be less beneficial than just playing on a 3DS in the first place. And for many people, that might break the immersion of it all. Honestly, 3DS emulation in its current state is all about trade-offs. We have multiple devices that have the right form factor and play certain games excellently, but we're far from Citra allowing these devices to surpass what a regular 3DS can actually offer. Obviously, if you take a look at Citra's compatibility list, emulation performance is not excellent for 100% of the 3DS's library. Whether we'll get to a point like that at all without emulating the hardware itself is actually debatable. Software emulation typically always has some edge case where it fails to live up to the original system. For 3DS, that's especially true of stereoscopic gameplay. While it's become sort of a meme to call the 3DS's 3D effects a gimmick that didn't actually work, the truth is that the effects actually work quite well toward enhancing the gameplay experience and sometimes graphical fidelity of games that used it well. I started replaying Pokemon Y on my new 3DS XL a couple weeks ago, and have kept 3D on for the full 10-ish hours I've put into it so far. 3D on versus 3D off is almost night and day as to the apparent graphics quality of battles in certain environments. It actually does make a huge difference, which I really wish I could show y'all on camera. Other games though, like Super Mario 3D Land and Stretch Mo, are even built around using 3D to gauge the depth of puzzles, to get a full sense of place while playing. And that's pretty much completely lost with emulation right now. Something like a Red Hydrogen 1 with an updated processor or volumetric displays could go a long way to help solve this. There are even options in-app for playing with a headset or 3D glasses, but all those still aren't quite the same as a pocketable dual-screen device with glasses-free 3D tech. No matter how much we adapt to it, we're losing something in translation. But, and a huge but, it's not all doom and gloom. Yes, we miss out on quite a bit going from a system that was purpose-built to play these games to a random smartphone line Microsoft is rumored to be discontinuing, but we also gain quite a bit of flexibility from that transition. We gain the ability to increase resolution, expand display sizes, play with other controllers, add cheat codes to games, modify games, to update them for fun or to patch bugs, or even just run games better than they could ever have been run on original hardware. Citra isn't perfect right now, but it's still damn good at providing a more than functional service that's mostly limited by the hardware we want to throw at it. And at the end of the day, no one's saying that you couldn't set down Citra every once in a while and pick up a regular 3DS to play the games that really benefit from the console's unique hardware feature set. Personally, I'll likely be jumping back and forth myself over the years, since I love the feel of playing on original hardware, but also really love tinkering with a bunch of different systems to see how good I can make some of my favorite games look. Those are my thoughts though. What are yours? Was this video helpful at all for getting you up and running with Citra? Or are you a Citra expert with a personal wish list for features through the software? Either way, let me know down in the comments. As always, if you found this video helpful or informative, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. Then make sure to get subscribed for more handheld tech videos in the future. If you're itching for more dual screen emulation info, there are also a couple links right here on the screen, wherever that actually is, that you can click on to check up setup guides for the Surface Duos and the Steam Deck. That's gonna be all for this video though. Until next time, catch you later.